Welcome back everyone to a new video. This is a big one. I'm really excited to show off today's progress, but to introduce the project for anyone new who might be watching, this is Wind Waker Unflooded, a 3D modeling fan art project where we have been reimagining the Kingdom of Hyrule as it could have existed within the world and art style of The Legend of Zelda, the Wind Waker, corresponding the islands that we saw of the Great Sea in that game to the unseen mountains of Hyrule that we could never fully explore. I know so many of us wanted to desperately explore that version of Hyrule that we could see a glimpse of in that game, but never truly explore. And this project is all about using 3D modeling to actually realize that world, see how the islands of the Great Sea connect to the world below the ocean, and implement locations from other games, create new locations. It's a hugely creative project where we've given ourselves a lot of freedom to, make it the way that we want to make it. And I'm really proud of just like how much of my perspective, there's so much that this has taught me about taking on a huge creative project and how much of myself I can put into it. And I'm just really excited to keep sharing progress with y'all. So without further ado, this is the newest and maybe biggest in a while update of Wind Waker Unflooded, Hyrule in the world and art style of The Legend of Zelda, the Wind Waker. But without further ado, let's take a look at the actual time lapse for the project and see everything I was able to get done today, because there's a lot. And my perspective basically on this video is I want to give y'all an update just on, it's not necessarily a particular location, but I'm going throughout the map and just anywhere where there's just like a hole in the terrain, a place that I haven't worked on yet. I'm just going through and I'm saying, okay, I'm going to fill in that hole. I'm going to add something to that location, and then I'm going to move on, look at the next part of the map that is clearly missing something, and fill in that location. And that is informing my process. But that's something that it's not just quote unquote filling in the gaps, but I may create new things in the process. And that's why I've left those gaps unfilled, is just because, and some of you may be wondering this, right? Is like, well, like if you kind of know what's supposed to be in between certain locations, why are you waiting to fill in? And part of it is just because, like, well, I want to give myself time to be creative later if there's something else that I end up imagining that I haven't imagined yet, right? I want to give myself time to say, oh, maybe I don't know it yet, but there could be a whole town right here. Maybe I don't know it yet, but there could be a farm, there could be a river, there could be a lake, there could be anything. And if I'm not sure yet, I want to wait to put anything in that space until I have an idea, until I have inspiration of something specific, right? Because several towns in this map have happened that way, where I was like, well, I'm not really planning on putting anything there. And then I'm like, well, there could be a little village. And that's happened before already. And you'll see it happen in this video, that there's things where I go, oh, I wasn't planning on putting anything necessarily like a landmark or anything in the space. But now that I see there is this much space with nothing there, let's add something creative, right? And we're starting the video really just by kind of filling in the gaps. And it's like, okay, there's just like a hole in between points. Let's just kind of fill in the terrain, add some hills, right? Fill in the gaps, add the cliffs. Just kind of, we're starting by filling in the space. But you can see there's a good bit of space that is empty kind of to the south of this town that I added recently, that I'm calling Lamir, and it's an original town. And you can see that there's a lot of space just to the south of it. So I'm getting, I had this kind of creative task of, well, what am I going to do, right, with that space? You can see from the original map that I'm basing this project off of, that's underneath the modeling for the project. I always keep that reference map visible at all times. The map is by Zachery, a huge inspiration for this project. Really, that gave me the guiding principles of how I want to construct Hyrule. How do I want to make the rivers flow? How do the mountains work? How do the islands of the Great Sea correspond to potential mountains? So that original map was hugely inspirational. But there are times where I'll look down and I'll go, well, Jacob didn't necessarily put anything in that quadrant besides, well, it's a couple of forests that I could add. So I could do that, or I could think to myself, well, maybe there's room for something else, right? And so I've really extrapolated upon that map, and it's still, Wind Waker Unflooded owes its foundation to that map. And that's definitely hugely important for this project, is that I've based everything off of that map that 2D map that you see in the backgrounds of every update video, right? And it slowly disappears the more I model, right? Which is, I think, kind of interesting. It's almost like watching the Venom symbiote take over, right? That like the more modeling that I do on this project, the less you see of the original map. And it is an interesting process, right? Because there's a lot of different instances where, like you'll see that I'm following a river that is based on the placement of a river in the previous map. But then it's like, well, where does that river go and how does it connect with other things? And you can see that as I've added this town, I've also added a river that goes alongside the border of the town. And that's something that wasn't placed in that original two-dimensional map, right? So there's a lot of extrapolation where I give myself the freedom to say, well, I can diverge and do my own thing. And I really appreciate this project that I felt that freedom, and that my contributors have also felt that freedom. I'm really excited just to continue to showcase progress from contributors that have been very creative and added all kinds of things to this map that I wouldn't have thought of, things that maybe I wasn't even talented enough to model. And so I'm always appreciative of all of my contributors, and you can find a long list of everyone that's worked on this project in the description of this video. And so I always want to say that I owe everything to all the people I've been able to collaborate with and base this project off of, and the original modelers for the Wind Waker as well. But I want to draw attention to, because you can see on screen, like I said, it's like we had this big empty space. What do? Oh, this is perfect room to add an entirely new lake to the project, right? And I think it's a really interesting spot because it's also kind of surrounded by these mountains from different islands that are necessarily there because of their placement in the original game, right? And it's always interesting to me how it's like, well, there's so many things that like I'm creating my own limitations, but then there's things that are there just because, well, in the original Wind Waker game, we had certain islands that were there, right? And so surrounding this lake, it's like there have to be mountains because we have like the Southern Fairy Island, we have Shark Island, and I think the Triangle Island on the other side. I think those are the three main islands that are, necessitating mountains around this lake. But I didn't want, I guess I didn't have to lower this geographic region, but I thought it would be just dramatic to kind of put it in a valley. That's where the railroad already was going through things. So I was like, well, yeah, let's keep this lake a little bit lower. Let's have all these mountains, rising high around it. So it's just a new dramatic kind of location. And yeah, like I try really hard just to continue to try to make this map geometrically and geographically and topographically interesting, right? That those are all things where I'm definitely conscious of, right? Like there could have been an easy way to do this map, keeping things relatively flat. But I've noticed that Zelda, and particularly the Wind Waker, has such a striking sense of topography with really dramatic highs and lows and these steep stepped cliffs and these mountains that are, kind of jagged, and they can, you can have these really dramatic shapes that is kind of unique to Wind Waker, especially, right, in comparison to some of the other Zelda games, right? Like Breath of the Wild has a relatively natural shape to its landscape, right? That's something where it's a little more naturalistic, right? And same with Twilight Princess, a little bit more, right? But Wind Waker is unafraid to be just very, I guess, just it's cartoonish with its geography, right? To the extent that like you can have these really dramatic, falls and cliffs and just like these giant spaces with these hard edges, and that's something that's definitely important to the art style. And it's been really interesting just to figure that out, because my initial sculpt for the topography of this map, like one of the first things I did when I started working on this project was I like made an extra layer, and it's not visible in most of the videos on this project. I should make a point of showing it off eventually, but one of the first things I did is I made a sculpt of, well, here's just the general shape of the terrain and what it could be, just using Blender's sculpt tool to kind of figure out, well, I have the islands over here, so this is where the mountains could be, this is where the valleys could be. And it's something that I've definitely deviated from, but it did help me to kind of, because one of the first questions I wanted to figure out was, is this map going to feel too spiky? Are there going to be too many mountains sticking too high up? And is it going to feel just a little bit too extreme, right? Just what am I figuring out with these islands? And part of that was also figuring out, well, not everything has to go from 0 to 100 elevation-wise, right? You can have these kind of mid-level hills as well, and just kind of figuring out the shape of the map and how everything could kind of interact and how you could get from high points to low points. And that was one of the first things I did on this project, was just like, you know, at a macro level for the whole map, figuring out, okay, what are the placements of the mountains going to be, and does this all feel like it sets up a satisfying world that is that feels interesting to navigate. That was one of the first things that I did, and I think it's been helpful just to like that's helped, you know, lay the foundation for the placement of a whole bunch of features, right? But it's also enough where it was vague enough where I've allowed myself to make new decisions later, right? And I think I've really appreciated that the most about this project, is that, like, yes, there were many things I knew going into this project, but there's a lot of things I didn't know. And part of the fun of this project was the discovery process of making decisions later, right? Of going, well, I don't exactly know what I'm going to do with this area yet, but I can come back later and make decisions. And that's why this video was possible, was just because I left all of these areas blank, and I could have just filled them in with green rolling hills and called it a day, but I wanted to wait until later to fill in the map. And so just, I think, allowing myself to do that, to live in the uncomfortability. It is definitely, it's discomfort to look at a part of your creative project and go, I'm going to intentionally leave it blank so that I can work on it later. That's tough. It's tough intentionally doing that. And I often don't like doing that. Often I think it's better to just put something down, even if it's wrong, so that you can go ahead and move forward with part of the project, even if you're going to change it later. Sometimes I feel like that makes sense to do. But with this project, I wanted to allow myself to live in the uncomfortability of uncertainty with certain creative decisions, to go, okay, I do have a strong perspective overall on this map. However, there are certain things that I don't exactly know how they're going to work until I get to them. And I'm going to be okay with that. And this project is so big that I think that that's the healthiest outlook I could have had, right? And I mean, I say past tense. I'm definitely still in the middle of this project, but I feel aware with all the work that I do, I'm ever approaching the end of this project, right? I'm always getting closer to that. And it's exciting. It's exciting to just keep looking at this map and to just keep feeling aware of how much has been done and how close we are to the end. And before we know it, this project will be complete, and I'll be able to say this is a complete version of the map of Hyrule as it could have existed within the world and art style of The Legend of Zelda: Wind Waker, right? And that's really exciting to me, just to see how much has been done and just to feel that closeness to the finish line. It definitely excites me, for sure. And I think that that's part of what inspired this video as well, was just like, well, I'm almost there. Let's just keep pushing through until we can finish it, right? And yeah, like that's, sometimes I feel like that's the wrong perspective to have, but I think that's something I'm feeling now, that I'm like, you know, I've put a lot of work in. I've put a lot into this map already that I'm excited by, like a lot of the main features that I was like, well, this is a cool, unique perspective. Like, there's a lot of locations that I wanted to add that I've already added, right? And so it's like, well, what's left is just filling in the gaps, and anything can be in those gaps, right? I'm not missing some major component, right? And there's things that, like, this version of Hyrule's missing that other Hyrules have, right? For sure. But there's also, it's like, well, this is its own take. It doesn't have to be in line with every single other version of Hyrule, even though I have committed myself to trying to include a lot of locations from other games. I've definitely allowed myself to have freedom to say, well, this is its own version of the map, and it is referential, but also I think it has its own identity, and it's been an absolute joy to try to figure out, well, what is my perspective, what makes this unique in comparison to other versions of Hyrule, right? One of those things is the railroad. I think that gives this project, definitely, it makes it feel like a unique version of Hyrule, because this is the first time that we've really properly seen rails in mainland Hyrule, right? And Breath of the Wild started to introduce, well, there's a lot more carts, and Tears of the Kingdom expanded its vehicle system as well, which was exciting. But yeah, like, I guess, like, I think trains are definitely, like, I think a great addition to Hyrule. I think especially with a map this big, and especially where I want to emphasize the story of connectivity, I think trains make a lot of sense. Another new thing that I'm adding in this video is going to be a giant kind of dragon sculpture coming out of this part of the rock near the... it's kind of near Lon Lon Ranch It's near, it's kind of the central Hyrule field of sorts, near the lake of Hyrule Castle and Castle Town, right? And so this was a suggestion that someone commented at one point, suggesting a kind of dragon sculpture coming out of the rock. And so I was like, yeah, like that's a good idea. It's been sitting in my head for a second about, well, where do I put it? Where could it go? And so, yeah, I thought it was finally time to implement that into the project because, yeah, I thought that was a really dope suggestion. And it was something that I definitely thought, yeah, like added something really cool to the project, into the world. And, you know, I enjoy having a couple of those sculptures, right? There's also a giant sculpture of a Redead coming out of the exterior of the Earth Temple, right? And I think that's a really dramatic image, right? And so I like the opportunity to kind of add in those kind of like these kind of giant things where you go, well, that's kind of crazy. Like, do I do it? And it's like, well, yeah, sure. Let's try it. Let's see if it works. Let's see if we can get away with adding something that crazy and cool to the world, right? And just see what we can do. And I think it's been really just exciting to feel the freedom to explore and add new things in that way. And yeah, like as part of the new village that I mentioned earlier, there's a giant statue of King Daphnis on top of this tower overlooking central Hyrule. So I think that's also just another dramatic thing where it's like, yeah, like this is Hyrule. There should be more monuments, right? You know, like they should have their own equivalent of Mount Rushmore and the Statue of Liberty, right? Like these kind of dramatic things that, you know, exemplify certain abstractions of, you know, cultural ideals. There's also the Gerudo heroines that I added to the map. And just like, yeah, just all of these things that help show that this is a culture that, you know, it's not just a natural setting, but there's all these things that people have built up over the centuries, over the thousands of years that people have lived there. There's been these kind of dramatic examples of development that emphasize some of the cultural values, right? And I think that that's definitely very interesting, right? We see that with the Goron statues, right, of their chieftain leaders that are etched over Death Mountain. That's another example. That's something that's really dramatic. And I want to continue to kind of add more of that, right? And Hyrule, of course, also, as part of the Zelda series, has a rich history with apocalypse, right? With, well, sometimes all that's left is ruins and just natural landscapes because so much of it has been demolished with centuries and centuries of war, battles for the Triforce, right? And, you know, the invasion of Ganon time after time, right? That's something that has destroyed the land time and time again. Destroyed the land, quote unquote. Destroyed civilization time and time again, right? But the land perseveres. And I think that's something that's really interesting about Hyrule that has allowed it to just kind of persevere as a strong natural space, but one full of the ruin of humanity, right? I think that's one of the unifying principles of Zelda lore, that despite everything, the natural world perseveres while humanity suffers time and time again, right? And there's definitely ways to redeem the people and to save them from evil, right? There's definitely there's a process there. I mean, and that necessitates all of the journeys that Link must go on time and time again, right? And to rescue the people that still live in this fallen world, right? But yeah, just Hyrule is definitely a long history of, you know, of war, and I think it's really cool just to, I don't know, just see how does that affect the map? How does that affect my perspective building a new version of the map, right? And I definitely, another thing that I want to continue to add is ruins, and that's something that I think this map is kind of missing right now. There's a couple of examples of strong ruins, and I have like the Lanayru Promenade, which I'm happy with how it looks, but I do want to continue to add ruins that make the world feel really lived in and old and ancient, because that's something that really impressed me about the original Wind Waker map was, right, is that you would be able to find these ruins hidden away in caves and underground parts of the, you know, things that should be underwater, but then you go in this cave and you see all these different ruins from a previous world, right? Not just in underwater Hyrule, but, right, just like in the Overlook Island cave and the Dragon Roost Island cave, where there's just this ruins of this lost civilization, and it just feels really, you know, like it feels like you're stepping into the past, right? It's how it feels in the Tower of the Gods, and I want to continue to add more of those. I've added a couple. I've added a whole ancient village in the Gerudo Desert that is a relic of another time. There's a lot of different ruins and ancient cities and temples and all kinds of things, but I want to continue to add more to really make it, to really give you the impression that you're stepping through kind of like a graveyard of lost civilizations, because I think that's also important for Hyrule to feel like. That's another unifying, part of Hyrule throughout the Zelda series, throughout multiple games. That's something that I think really unifies it, right? I'm really excited now, and I'll go ahead and talk about what I'm modeling now. And I wasn't really sure that I would do this, but I guess I have to talk about what am I doing, right? So I guess like I am committing to having Kiri Forest as an extension of the Forest Haven, right? And obviously in the southeast corner of my version of Hyrule, we have Kiri Forest and the Lost Woods, and that is an important part of the map. But also, I had this space in the northern region of the map, and I decided, well, maybe the north version of the forest that we see in Korok Forest and Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, maybe that's a separate geographical place, right? Maybe that's a different forest that has its own history and is worth including as a space, not just that the Lost Woods have moved and migrated, but it's its own forest with its own history, right? And there was once a Deku tree that lived there, but has since decayed, right? And the seedlings of the Deku tree have moved on to the Forest Haven, where it sits now in the southern region. But I thought it would be interesting to include this northern version of what we would recognize as Korok Forest in Breath of the Wild, and I thought that would just be helpful, just because that there's a lot of games that make a point of having a forest in the north of Hyrule as well, right? Echoes of Wisdom and A Link to the Past also have a northern forest in the map. And so I thought, it's something that makes sense for the games. Obviously, Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, and Twilight Princess all support primarily southern forest regions. However, a lot of games do point to a northern forest region as well, even if it's just a small geographical area, right? So I think it makes sense. There's room for it. And it is something that it's just another example of sometimes there's quote-unquote duplicates of things in Hyrule, right, where you have different versions of the Lost Woods, and I think that's just okay. I've accepted it. There's times where I try not to do that, and I know that there's theories of there being multiple Lake Hylias and multiple Death Mountains. I'm a little more uncomfortable with that, but I am comfortable with saying there can be multiple quote-unquote Lost Woods, there can be multiple Temple of Times, there could be multiple Hyrule Castle and Castle Towns over the ages. So maybe it's hypocritical, but there's times where I feel like I'm able to kind of make those inferences, and there's times where I don't, where I feel like it's tougher too. And that's just part of this project, right? It's just like this project is just like it's a long creative process of just making that decision over and over again about, well, what makes sense to me, right? And it's ultimately just my opinion of those things, right? But just navigating what makes sense to me lore-wise, and just I have my own opinion on different Zelda theories, and it does impact the geography of this world. So I just have to kind of, at a certain point, sometimes it's a hard decision to make, but I just have to kind of weigh all the options and think, well, what makes sense to me? And I have to go with that, right? I have to go with that. And there's a lot of decisions in this map that people may find controversial for different reasons, right? I've incorporated, thanks to a contributor, Labrina and Holodrum are going to be a part of this project as well, and I'm really excited to show those off, to continue to show those off as part of the project. But without further ado, let's start wrapping up this project, or this video. Just thank you all so much for watching. It has really been a joy to just continue to show off this project and to share it with you, and so just the best thing that y'all can do is to comment down below your ideas, your feedback, your concerns, things you like, things you don't like, suggestions you have. I take notes of that, and like I've said before, I get a lot of inspiration from reading the comments, and that's definitely hugely important for deciding what I work on next. So without further ado, leave your comments in the comment section down below. I'm gonna shut up. I've yapped for too long, but without further ado, I'll let you go.
Now, if you're looking for other ways to support me, as always, you can support me as a creator by becoming a member on Patreon. There you'll get access to all kinds of exclusive behind-the-scenes content like in-progress outlines, scripts, storyboards, rough cuts, and even soundtracks for my newest films. By becoming a member, you'll also be thanked in the credits for any film I finish during your membership. You can also support me by streaming my music. I compose all of the scores for my own short films, and you can listen to those soundtracks on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you listen to music. Just look up Joe Kendrick. That's JoekenDrick. Y'all have a wonderful day, and without further ado, I'll let you go.